Hi, I'm Roger Crooks with the Oregon Carvers Guild. The Guild is developing a series of 3 classes with supporting documentation and videos. The first one, this one, is called Practical Advice for the Beginning Carver. Once you understand the concept of sharpening, have the right tools, and develop the right technique, continued practice will build your muscle memory for sharpening. Once that muscle memory kicks in, sharpening becomes fast, easy, and almost second nature. Our recommended approach is to buy quality tools and sharpen them frequently. With a good blade, getting in the habit of frequent sharpening will save you time and effort, but more importantly, increase your joy of carving. Carving with dull tools is not a lot of fun and can be unsafe. By stropping your tool frequently, it will save you time and effort in the long run, avoiding going back to honing and working through the grits with stones to get your dull tool sharp again. I have 4 different strops here. Notice I've got them all covered in a plastic bag, because one of the main things you want to do is keep them clean. And if you're working in a dusty wood shop like here, you'll see how handy that is. Most people look at this as the traditional strop. Most strops are all double-sided. I have one I made here on a 2x4, and it works well for sharpening knives because it gives you space between the stropping surface and the workbench, so you don't drag your knuckles. This is a sort of a special purpose strop. It's good for removing the burr on inside of tools. It's got a bunch of different profiles that meet the curvature of your tool. And then there's just a small handy one that you can use as needed. Again, double-sided. Often we use the 2 sides for different grits. One would be, in this case, a white grit is more aggressive. The green grit is, in this one, your final polish. Or on this one, I left the second side without compound for final polishing. So, a bunch of different options here. So the first thing you want to do with your strop is to charge it with compound. So I've got 2 sticks here, white and green. And these obviously have been used, but especially for the first time for a new one, you want to really put a good coat on there. Sometimes, depending on the hardness of the compound, you have to really get aggressive. But once you have your strop charged with a compound, a little compound goes a long way. You don't need to cake it in, and usually maybe at the start of a carving session you'll wipe it a few times, but you'll be good for a long time. You'll also notice that there's dark areas on your compound, especially if you use white, you'll see dark areas. That's actually the metal that you're removing from the blade as you're sharpening it. So as we go through the demonstrations of sharpening different tools, the tools we'll be sharpening today are knives, gouges, and V-tools. We'll show you several different views of the tool running across the strop. So a close-up on the knives. This one is about 2 inches long, and the bevel is about a 1/16 of an inch or less from the edge, and that's the bevel angle that you need to match when you're doing your stropping. This is about 1.25 inches knife, And again, the bevel is a 1/16 or 32nd of an inch from the edge, and the bevel on knives are generally all the same. So in all cases, the first thing you want to do is mark the bevel, and so we're going to use a red pen today, so it'll show up a little bit better on the video. And a knife, we're going to do both sides, and we've got two knives here using for the demonstration, sort of a shorter one and a longer one. Helps to have a steady hand. So that's a little bit too much, but that's more example of how you want to do it. The angle of the bevel on knives is about 12.5 degrees. And a way to get there's two ways. Once you get more used to doing this, 12.5 degrees is almost flat. So one way of doing it is start flat and then raise the tool just a little bit. Take a few swipes and then check your marking, and you see there it is all gone. The other way of doing it is you can start straight up and down at 90 degrees, half that 45, half it again 22.5, and then half that again gets you down to your 13 degrees. So that's another way of doing that. Once your muscle memory starts, you'll probably just start like that. And again, check your bevel to see that you're making full contact. So you'll notice on this 2x4 strop, I've got plenty of room for my hand. And the other technique that we'll be talking about is you don't need a lot of pressure on the blade against the strop, but you do need full contact. So sometimes if you're not paying attention, you'll lower the handle, which brings the tip up, and it's not getting sharp. So one technique I like is two hands, and at the end of your swipe, lift straight up. Don't roll like that, otherwise you'll tend to dull the blade instead of sharpen it. Flip it over, go back and forth. So when you're using a strop like this, especially when we get into the gouges, it's a good idea to clamp it to a surface so it's nice and sturdy, and that way you can use two hands to do your sharpening. So to give you a close-up view and a different strop and a different knife, we're going to do the same thing here. Again, you can start at 90, 45, 22.5, and now you get down into the 12-degree range. Or you can just start flat and raise up. So we've got the angles marked, and because this is a long blade, I'm going to use the two-hand method, and I'm going to take a couple swipes here and take a look, and you can see I didn't quite get the tip right, so we're going to go back and concentrate more on getting the tip end of the blade on the stropping. Go back the other way. And we can see there, it's all good. So once you build your muscle memory here, this will become second nature. and I find doing 10 strokes at a time, and again lift up at the end. So this is a number 3 gouge. It's called a fishtail because it comes out like that. The number 3 indicates the curvature, which this one is pretty flat. Again, the bevel is highly polished, and when you sharpen it, there's going to be a slight burr formed right at the tip on the inside of the gouge, and you can sometimes feel it with your fingernail or sliding your finger over. And the burr is something that you need to remove before you go to your project to start carving. And this is a close-up example of a number 9. And you'll see when sharpening it, we want to make sure we get both edges covered. That's why it's very important to mark it, the bevel, with your black or red Sharpie, so that when you're done swiping, you can make sure that you've hit both corners as well as the center. Again, a burr will form, and we'll show you different ways of getting rid of the burr on a tool like this. But this is so for our gouges, we're again going to mark the bevel. This is a number 3 gouge, fishtail, and a number 9 gouge. Be particular about marking the very outside edges of the gouge. So again, the first thing is to find that angle, and I start out flat and sort of feel when you think you've got the bevel, and then I'm going to swipe to the left, to the right, rotating as we're going back and forth. And what we're looking for is a shiny bevel, and you can see there I got the outside edges, but I didn't quite get the center, so we're going to go back and try that again. We're going to put more pressure on the end of the tool, and now we've got a clean shiny bevel. Now number 3 is fairly flat, so you don't have to rock your wrist as much as you would on a number 9. And again, we're going to do that the same way. We're going to start out at 90 degrees here, right straight down, find that angle, and again, this is where your muscle memory is going to help. You'll find that pretty quickly once you get used to it. And you're going to go to the left, and you're going to rotate your wrist to get the edges. Check. And you can see we're almost there. Didn't quite get that edge, but we got that one. So again, go back, find your angle, like on a number 9, it takes quite a bit of wrist movement to get the full sides of the blades. So in doing this operation here, there's really two important things. One is how you're going to hold the tool and how you're going to swing the tool. And for the swinging of the tool, we'll use a wider shot. But basically, once you've got your angle, you're going to lock your elbows to your body, and you're going to swing with your hips as you're rotating with your wrist. So we'll do that again, but now with a broader view, so you can see my body movement. Again, we're going to start like this. Going to find that angle. Going to lock my elbows into my body. I'm going to keep my arms as firm as I can. And I'm going to start swiping by moving my hips. Again, with my arms locked to my body. And I'm just going to swing and rotate. Swing and rotate. And that's the again, that's the muscle memory you need to build with the right technique, and it'll become fast and intuitive to stop your carving, quickly go to the strop, sharpen your tool, and you'll be back carving in seconds. So on the number 9, same thing. We're going to find that angle. Going to lock my elbows, and again, the rotation is much more, you're rotating much more to get the ends of a number 9. And again, the rotation is done with your wrist. Next, we're going to do a V-tool. This is a 10 millimeter V-tool. Again, job 1 is to mark the bevel. And a V-tool is basically 2 chisels on the side, and then a small gouge right there, which is called the keel. So sharpening a V-tool is probably the most challenging tool that you have. So step 1 is, as we have done with the other tools and the knives, you're going to sharpen the chisels, which are flat. And so we've got that angle right as the bevel is shiny. So now we want to do the other side. And again, so that looks good. Now we have the keel, and you see still a little bit of red there, which we haven't touched yet. And you're going to sharpen that pretty much the same way you do with a gouge, only we're only going to rotate it probably the lower third of the blade. So we're going to get that angle. I'm going to start rotating. And then we're going to check for any marker. So we got that good. So now it's just a matter going back and forth. So for a closer angle, we'll go back here, and again we're going to do the flats first. One side, the other side. And a V-tool, it's important to keep everything symmetrical. So however many swipes you make on one side, you make on the other. And now for the keel. Again, notice how far I rotate. It's not like we did on the number 9 where I went all the way over, but just the lower third of that blade. Is what you're sharpening. That should give you a nice sharp V-tool. So we talked about when you are stropping that a burr is formed on the inside of the gouge. So in this case, since we're sharpening this side, a little burr will form on the inside, and sometimes you can feel it with your fingernail. You need to get rid of the burrs before you use it on your project. A couple easy ways of doing that. If you have one of these type of strops, you can match the profile of your tool with one of these profiles and just rub it that way. You can also take a piece of leather, bend it to match the profile, and get rid of it that way. So this is the number 3 gouge. For more gouge, it has a much rounder profile. This is a number 9. Again, you can use the leather to fit inside the gouge there, or you can find one of these profiles here. In this case, this one matches pretty well, and get rid of the burr that way. Same thing with the V-tool. Again, you can take your piece of leather and get in there, although it might be a little difficult because of the way the keel is very tight. A profile like on here, where you have a perfect edge there, is a good way to get rid of the burrs inside of a V-tool. There's also things like slipstones that have a very tight and pointed corner that you can use to get in there. But those are different ways of getting rid of the burr. So when you're stropping, you're not removing very much metal, so the burrs are very, very tiny. If you're honing, which means you're using stones or sandpaper, you're doing that because you want to reshape the tool or get the tool in better shape. So you have to remove a lot of metal. In that case, the burrs off of a stone or sandpaper are going to be much more pronounced, and it's much more important to get rid of them. Now, how do you know when your tool is sharp and you're done stropping? Well, it's always good to have a test block that is preferably the same type of wood that your project is. In this case, we have a block of basswood. And what I suggest is, before you sharpen your tool, take some of these cuts that we're going to do here, sharpen your tool, and then come back and compare your newly sharpened gouge with the cuts made from the gouge before you sharpened it. So we have straight grain, we have end grain, and we have cross grain. So this is a number 3 gouge that we similar to the one that we were doing in the demonstration. It's fairly flat and takes some cuts. And what we're looking for is to make sure that there's no tear out on the bottom of the cut or on the sides. So for a more aggressive tool, we'll do the same thing with the number 9. And we're going to take a look at, again, the bottom of the cuts and the side of the cuts. For a V tool, we'll use a small palm one for the demonstration here. In this case, we're going to make a curved line real close together, or whatever you're comfortable with. Again, we're going cross grain here, and just like on the gouge, we want to take a look at the bottom and the sides to make sure there's no tear out. The other thing you're looking for is how much pressure you need to make these cuts compared to the pressure that you had to use before you sharpen the tool. So we can go long grain, and so on. So for testing your knife, you can test it on long grain, you can test it on face grain. And the nice thing about a sharp knife is it leaves a nice clean shiny surface. It also makes a very pleasing sound as you slice through the wood.
Demonstrate 3 examples. This is a number 8 curved gouge. The simplest test is test with the long grain, and it should just easily work, but the key test is against the end grain, and you can test at an edge of that, and it should work easily and leave a shiny surface. And that'll be true of all the tools, whether it's a V tool. I can test, keep my fleshy part out of the way. I can also test the two sides and the edge of it. So that edge cuts really nicely. That cuts a little bit harder. And then I can test the V itself and the end grain, and it's easy to move. Same way with the knife. I'll test the tip, the middle, and the inside to see how well it cuts. Obviously it cuts like butter on the long grain. The question is on the end grain. So the inside cuts really easily on this knife. The center cuts really easily. Not so much on the end. So the end would need a little bit of work. Just testing in one spot is not enough.